video is lesson 7, and we're going to learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide positive and negative numbers, and then a little bit of absolute value at the end. So let's get started. First, your rules. You need to learn the rules, and then you need to use the rules, okay? A lot of times I spend hours teaching a rule, and then when it comes to doing a worksheet, the students say, oh, well, it didn't look right. Okay, don't worry about how it looks, worry about your rule. First, addition. Now, when you have addition, there's only two options. Either you're going to add two numbers that have the same signs, or you're going to add two numbers that have different signs. Okay? When you add two numbers that have the same signs, you add and keep the sign. Okay? For example, 3 plus 5, both are positive, add and keep the sign. Positive 8. Negative 3 plus negative 5, same signs, add and keep your sign. Okay? And that's all there is to adding with the same signs. Now, if you have different signs, as in one positive, one negative, then you subtract and take the sign of the larger number. Okay, if you have two different signs, you're going to subtract and take the sign of the larger number. All right, let's look at some examples of this, because this is the one that usually gives people trouble. Mainly because they think, well, I'm adding, why am I subtracting? Well, when you have two different signs, the sign tells you technically which direction to go on a number line, but you can also think of these as holes in the ground and piles of dirt. All right, so if I have negative 3 plus 5, addition with two different signs, let's just look at what my little scenario would be there. The negative number naturally is going to be your hole in the ground. So I've got 3 holes in the ground. Now, the positive 5 is going to be the piles of dirt that came out of holes. So I've got 5 piles of dirt over there. Now, every time I take a pile and fill in a hole, let's see what happens. If I take this one to here, and this one to here, and then say this one to here, what happens? Well, I still have 2 piles left over, don't I? All right, so my answer is positive 2. So instead of having to draw piles out every time, you can just know the rule. I'm showing you why the rule works so that you don't have to do this every time. You subtract one number from the other, the larger one from, you subtract the small one from the larger, and then take the sign of the larger number. So if I had positive 3 plus negative 5, and I just apply the rule, 5 minus 3 is still 2, but this time the larger number is what? 5. So I'm going to have a negative answer. Okay? Now, what would happen if I had, real quick, negative 3 plus positive 3. Well, then I've got the same number of holes in the ground as I do piles of dirt. So when I push them all together, I get 0. Okay? Okay, on to subtraction now. The great thing about addition is that it's commutative. What does commutative mean? That means you can move numbers around and still get the same answer. Like 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus 2. I can commute those numbers and still get the same answer. Subtraction, we're not as fortunate. Subtraction is not commutative. If I say 5 minus 2, that is not the same thing as 2 minus 5, so it's not commutative. Okay, what if I told you that I had 2 stacks of papers, and one of them has 100 addition problems on it, and the other one has 100 subtraction problems. Which one would you pick? Most people, if they're being honest, would say, I'd rather have the addition. We like to add. We don't mind adding. Subtraction, we're not too fond of it. So what if I told you there's a way to change all the subtraction problems into addition problems, and then you don't have to worry about it? Okay, let me show you how to change any subtraction problem into addition problem. The rule is, here's your rule for subtraction. Change all of your minus signs into plus a negative. A minus is the same thing as adding a negative, okay? So here's how you do this. If you have 2 minus 5, you can change this to 2 plus negative 5. Then you just apply those 2 addition rules that we had previously. I've got different signs, so I'm going to subtract and take the sign of the larger number, okay? Now let's look at some more examples. What if I have negative 2 minus 5? You're going to, and a lot of times you can say this is keep, change, change. Keep, change, change. You keep the first number just like it is. You change the minus sign to addition, and you change the sign of the following number to the opposite of whatever it was. So for example, I'm going to keep the negative 2 just like it is. I'm going to change the minus to a plus sign, and then I'm going to change this to the opposite. Right now it's positive, so I'm going to change it to negative. Now you're adding 2 numbers with the same signs, so you add and keep the sign. Okay? Let's look at another example. Negative 2 minus negative 5. Keep the negative 2. Change the minus to a plus. Now I'm going to change this to the opposite of what it was. It was a negative 5. Now it's going to be a positive 5. Negative 2 plus positive 5, subtract and take the sign of the larger number. So I've got positive 3. Okay? One more example. What if I have 2 minus negative 5? All right? Keep the 2 like it is. Change this to a plus. Change this to the opposite of what it used to be. Okay? I covered pretty thoroughly how to deal with 2 numbers at a time. So let's just look at a problem. Sometimes you're going to have a string of numbers that are added or subtracted. Let me show you the way to do these so that you don't mess up. Don't get confused. Let's take a problem. Let's say 2 minus 3 plus 5 minus 1 minus 3. Now, yes, you can just plow through this, add, subtract, changing your signs if you want to. Or watch this. Let's go through here first and change all of the minus signs to plus a negative. I'm going to change this to plus a negative, and this to plus a negative, and this to plus a negative. Okay? Now that this is all addition, it's commutative. I can rearrange these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the positive numbers together and the negative numbers together. As in, here's the 2 plus 5. And then I'm going to take the negative 3 and the negative 1 and the negative 3. And I always kind of underline my numbers when I start commuting them to make sure I don't leave anything behind. Now, the benefit to this is you can add these 2 together and get 7. When you're adding all negative numbers together, you know you're just going to add the numbers and keep it negative. So I've got 3 plus 1 is 4 plus 3 is 7, and you keep your sign. So now I've got negative 7. Here's where you're going to subtract and take the sign of the larger number. So you only have to subtract once. And positive 7 plus negative 7 would leave me with 0. Okay? So when you have more than just 2 numbers, go ahead and group them like this, and that way you're doing all addition and then one subtraction. And it just keeps you from making a careless mistake. Okay? Okay, next up is multiplication, and this one's much simpler. The rule here is when you're multiplying 2 numbers together, every 2 negatives makes a positive. Every two negatives will cancel each other out and make a positive. And let me just show you some examples. If you've got -2 times -3, two negatives make a positive. You multiply as usual. Now if I have -2 times 3, I get -6. Notice it doesn't matter which one's bigger or smaller, like it did in addition and subtraction. All that matters is how many of these do you have. So I could have 2 times -3. That's still -6. All right. Now let's look what happens if I have a string of numbers multiplied together. As in -1 times 2 times 3 times 4. I'm going to go through here and multiply. -1 times 2 is -2. Times 3 is -6. Times 4 is -24. Even though I have 3 positive numbers, this one little negative sign is the one that is the most important when it comes to my answer. Okay? -1 times -2 times -3 times -4. I've got 4 negatives multiplied together. So what do you think your answer is going to be? Positive or negative? Well, let's just see. -1 times -2 is +2. +2 times -3 is -6. And -6 times -4 brings me back to +24. So even though I had 4 numbers all multiplied together and they were all negative, they canceled each other out and I wound up with a positive. So you have to follow your rule, not just what looks like it's going to make sense. Next up is division. All right. The rule for division is the same as it was for multiplication. 2 negatives make a positive. And remember, a lot of times your division is represented by a fraction line. So fractions are involved with this as well. If I have -6 divided by +2, that's -3. If I have +6 divided by -2, that's still -3. But if I get -6 divided by -2, then I wind up with a positive number. Okay? Now let's look at how this is affected in fractions. If you have -1 over -3, two negatives cancel each other out. So this is a +1/3. Okay, +1/3. Now let's look at if I have -1 over 3. Well, this is the same thing, it's just the whole thing being negative. Okay, I see most mistakes come about when we're doing slope in algebra and you start getting a negative in the numerator or the denominator, and people don't know what to do there. But if you have -2/3, if the whole thing is negative, you can write that as -2 over 3. You can write that as 2 over -3. What you cannot do is make that -2 over -3, because this is positive and we started off with a negative. So just be sure you don't split this negative up and give 1 to each numerator and denominator. You cannot do this. This is the only thing you can't do. Okay? Okay. I want to squeeze in a little word here in this topic about absolute value. It is shown with 2 bars like this. Absolute value actually means how many spaces on the number line is this number worth. Your sign tells you direction. Absolute value is not concerned with direction. We're only concerned with worth. So how many spaces on a number line would this be worth? Well, it's worth 2. How many spaces on a number line is -2 worth? It's still worth 2. Whenever I see people do these problems, they always get this one right and they get this one wrong because they think it means change the sign. It does not. It means drop the sign. Drop the sign. It's not negative, it's not positive. It's just the number. Okay? All right. I have a worksheet as usual. If you're working at home, the link will be down in the description. Now the first page of your worksheet is going to have all the rules that I just went over and the examples. The second page of the worksheet is your problems. Now, on your left, there's a blank. In that blank, I want you to put the numbers from the first sheet, and I've got them circled there, 1A, 1B, 2, and 3, and 4. That applies to that problem. This again helps you start analyzing your own problems, okay? When you take a standardized test, such as HiSET, GED, ACT, whatever, the problems are not separated for you. They're just all jumbled in there. That's why one of the skills I'm trying to get through here in this little series of lessons is problem analysis. So it's very important that on the left-hand side of those problems, you look at the problem and decide, well, am I using 1A, 1B, or multiple, however many, okay? So go ahead and get started on your worksheet and check back with me for lesson 8. See you soon.